So welcome everyone to this Vital Sites event on the Diagnostic Tool for Transboundary Conservation Planners. It's great to have you with us. This is an event that's part of the IUCN and World Commission on Protected Areas Vital Sites series, a series of online events around protecting biodiversity through fair and effective protected and conserved areas around the world. Your host for today will be Kevan Zunckel, and you'll be joined by a series of experts, including Dominique Verdugo, Boris Ag, Maja Vasilijević, and Todd Walters. So we have the critical mass needed now to begin. Our participants have joined. So over to you, Kevan.
Thanks very much, Rucha, and thanks for those participants who have joined us this afternoon, this morning, this evening, wherever you might be around the world. It's fantastic to have you with us, and thank you to the IUCN WCPA Vital Sites platform for hosting us. Really looking forward to this afternoon's session. And just to kick off, I would like to start off with a small presentation on the Transboundary Conservation Specialist Group. And just to tell you a little bit about the group, that I'm sure many of you are aware, the IUCN has a number of commissions that assist it in its work. And the Transboundary Conservation Specialist Group is nested within the World Commission on Protected Areas. From the perspective of its membership and its objectives, it is the largest global voluntary network of transboundary conservation specialists. It supports CBD parties in delivering on their goals and targets for the CBD program of works for protected areas. It also supports transboundary conservation initiatives through improved knowledge management, networking, and capacity building. And you can see in the illustrations on the right of that slide, the distribution of members by region and by sector. So it's some biases in that, but otherwise quite a nice distribution. From the perspective of the Transboundary Specialist Group's activities, very briefly, what we are involved in is the development of knowledge products. As you can see on the right-hand side of that slide, some of the publications that we've been involved in. We provide advice on transboundary conservation establishment, management, and processes to planners and managers. We help to develop policy recommendations of global and regional importance, provide advice on transboundary UNESCO World Heritage Sites. We convene international events and training workshops. We enable knowledge exchange and networking, and we cooperate at multiple levels and work at establishing partnerships. And at the bottom of that slide, you'll see the web address, www.tbpa.net. And I'd encourage you to have a look at our website, investigate the possibility of becoming a member. You will find those details on that site, as well as the topic of this afternoon's discussion, the Diagnostic Tool for Transboundary Conservation Planners. You will find a link to that as well in the tools. And then Rucha has briefly mentioned the folk that are on the panel this afternoon, and by way of the program, I'll reintroduce them. But I will give a little bit more of a detailed introduction of each speaker as their presentation comes up. So the first, we'll start off with Maja Vasilijević, who will give a presentation on an overview of the diagnostic tool for transboundary conservation planners, followed by Boris Ag, who will talk on the experience with implementing the tool in Europe. Then Dominique Verdugo will speak about the use of the tool to develop a joint management plan for the Lower Awash Lakabe transboundary conservation landscape between Djibouti and Ethiopia. And lastly, but not least, Todd Walters will talk about using the tool as part of an educational process with students in the transboundary context. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I'm going to hand over to Maja. But Maja, before you present, I'd just like to introduce you. So Maja Vasilijević is a thematic coordinator for nature and biodiversity at NEMO, who works with the European Commission, where she is responsible for monitoring of EU life, nature and biodiversity projects. She has 20 years of experience in nature conservation with core expertise in transboundary conservation and protected area management. She founded EcoHorizon Consultancy Company, where she provided consulting services for various institutions, including WWF, the IUCN, European Commission, and the UNDP. Maja cooperates with the IUCN's World Heritage Program as an evaluator of World Heritage Sites. She was the chair of the IUCN WCPA Transboundary Conservation Specialist Group for 8 years and is currently vice chair of the group. Formerly, she was working for IUCN's Secretariat and IUCN Program Office for Southeastern Europe. Maja is an experienced evaluator of EU grant proposals and author of a number of IUCN's publications, including the IUCN WCPA Best Practice Guidelines on Transboundary Conservation, published in 2015. She holds a Master of Arts degree in Geography, awarded by the University of Melbourne. Maja, can I hand over to you to give us your presentation?
Thank you, Kevan. Thank you very much. Okay, as Kevan said, the topic of my presentation today is the Diagnostic Tool for Transboundary Conservation Planners. I will introduce the tool by providing the key elements of the tool, as well as some historical background on the development of the tool. So the Diagnostic Tool for Transboundary Conservation Planners, with the full name being Suggested Questions to Determine Feasibility for Transboundary Conservation, was developed in 2012 on the basis of UNEP's unpublished questionnaire and based on the Transboundary Conservation Planning Framework, which was incorporated into Initiating Effective Transboundary Conservation, publication by IUCN. That was part of IUCN ECARO's project, financed by the Finland's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. At that time, we also developed an electronic version of the tool, which was more user-friendly than the published version of the tool, because it provided easier completion of the tool and automated generation of the report. The diagnostic tool was then acknowledged and incorporated into best practice guidelines of IUCN WCPA that the Transboundary Conservation Specialist Group developed in 2015. And that, I would say, is a landmark publication regarding the transboundary conservation, with a lot of experience gathered, and I certainly would advise you to have a look at it if you still haven't. It not only provides theoretical background on transboundary conservation, but also collects best practices from all around the world on benefits and challenges, but also about the transboundary conservation process. The diagnostic tool was also endorsed by Southern African Development Community's regional TFCA guidelines. And based on the practice of implementation of the tool in various regions of the world, and based on the new knowledge that was gathered in 2015 and the theoretical framework, we saw that it's time to review the tool and update it. So in 2020, version 2 was published within WWF Adria's program financed by SIDA. The tool is freely available at the link on www.tvpa.net, the website administered by the Transboundary Conservation Specialist Group. So let's go a step back and see why do we need such a tool that would assess the feasibility for transboundary conservation in the first place. So if you look at the definition of transboundary conservation, which is a process of cooperation to achieve conservation goals across one or more international boundaries, as stated, as defined in the best practice guidelines of IUCN. We can see that transboundary conservation has the potential to achieve multiple benefits, with ecological benefits being at the core of these benefits, because we must not forget that transboundary conservation, although it is the process of cooperation, it is very much about ecological reasoning, about nature conservation and conservation of species and habitats, achievement of ecological integrity. But apart from these ecological objectives, transboundary conservation can generate a plethora of other benefits, such as socioeconomic and cultural benefits, where connections and ties between parties are strengthened, friendly relations enabled, traditional and indigenous peoples and communities encouraged to engage in protected area management. Also, there are management and research benefits, direct benefits to protected area staff, where parties share heavy equipment, do the joint patrolling, combat invasive species, for example, or do the monitoring of projects in cooperative way. And finally, there are political benefits, which is as the establishment of diplomatic relations between the relevant countries. But considering that transboundary conservation involves different countries, we can say that these ecosystems that we are looking at and that we are trying to conserve are in many cases divided by these international boundaries. So we have to think of different institutional and management and governance arrangements that we encounter, different political, economic situations and social situations. So we are dealing with a lot of challenges and quite complex situation here. So transboundary conservation is seen as potentially a way for overcoming these differences. And because of this complex situation, careful planning of the Transboundary Conservation Initiative prior to taking action can significantly help to generate success and effectiveness. And this is exactly where the Diagnostic Tool for Transboundary Conservation Planners comes into the agenda, as it offers a relatively rapid assessment of the feasibility of for transboundary conservation. The tool helps transboundary conservation proponents to diagnose the complex situation and design the process by developing efficient strategies. The aim of the diagnostic tool is to support the decision-making process leading to the institutionalization of transboundary conservation, meaning the establishment of transboundary conservation area. The key objectives of the tool: at first, this is to enable the planners and facilitators to assess and evaluate feasibility for efficient design of the initiative. But the tool is not only used at the beginning of the Transboundary Conservation Initiative, but it can be used anytime throughout the implementation of the process by providing an update on the status of issues that are critical for efficient functioning of the transboundary conservation process. The tool also has as one of the objectives to strengthen the capacity of stakeholders on issues that are critical for the establishment and implementation of the initiative, and it offers the possibility of an interactive participatory approach at transboundary or national levels, and also enable rapid self-assessment. I will talk about it a bit later. The target audience are individuals and institutions that are engaged in planning, initiating, and facilitating or supporting the transboundary conservation process, which can be protected area management authorities, or government officials, civil society organizations, community representatives, international organizations, or any other transboundary conservation proponents. The structure of the tool is actually quite simple. We have developed the tool in the Excel spreadsheet, and it includes 5 tabs. The first one is introduction and instructions, and the instructions really need to be read carefully in order to be able to complete the tool and the questionnaire nicely. The second tab is glossary and references. The third one is the questionnaire with 100 carefully selected questions on the following themes. So we have compelling ecological reasons for transboundary conservation. As we said, that nature conservation is the core objective of transboundary conservation, but benefits and challenges beyond ecological reasons that I also mentioned are also important for transboundary initiatives, identification of stakeholders, and assessment of capacities to work across international boundaries. The fourth tab is a report, which is automatically generated while writing, while completing the questions, and annex that lists most common benefits and challenges of transboundary conservation, which can be consulted anytime during the completion of the tool. So it can help with completion. So the key characteristics of the tool, it is adaptable to any region. It has global application. It provides for qualitative assessment based on both quantitative and qualitative analysis. Here you can see some questions as with I, letter I. So those are informative questions, but there are also questions that are scored quantitatively. It provides for a rapid assessment and a cost-effective assessment, and also, as I mentioned, self-assessment or facilitator-guided process. So I will say a few words about these approaches and what does it mean, self-assessment or facilitator-guided process. So approaches to completing the tool, basically, we detected the three main approaches. The first one, which we favor the most, is completing the tool through a transboundary participatory workshop, because it gathers most important stakeholders from the concerned countries. And this is also where the stakeholders can then debate the complex issues and maybe find solutions, hopefully find solutions during this workshop. The other approach is to hold national workshops in the concerned countries, where you would have stakeholders from the relevant countries gathered in nationally based workshops. This doesn't have to be a disadvantage that it is not a transboundary workshop, because as much as stakeholders can debate on complex and potentially dangerous issues, here you avoid these potential conflicts. So national workshops are also, let's say, fine to hold. In both of these approaches, a facilitator, an expert facilitator who has to lead the discussion to the point needs to be engaged. And in the first transboundary workshop, the facilitator would lead the discussion and moderate, and report is generated automatically. While in the second, the national workshops approach, the facilitator would then at the end gather the reports from all the concerned countries and had to generate another report. And the third approach is the individual self-assessment, where individual or institution can do a checkup by themselves and see how they stand in terms of the potential for going in working in transboundary way. Maybe this one is more subjective than the other approaches, because it doesn't involve high level of stakeholder inclusion. So while writing the questionnaire, the report is automatically generated and available at the end. The report consists of 4 thematic parts that I already mentioned previously. So the compelling ecological reasons, benefits and challenges beyond these reasons, identification of key stakeholders. And by the way, it can also, if it is possible to do the stakeholder analysis prior to the national or transboundary workshops, that would be really helpful. But even if this is not possible to do, so you don't gather the most important stakeholders, it is fine, because then you would brainstorm during these workshops and invite other stakeholders in a later stage. And the fourth area is the capacity to work across international boundaries, where the report shows what is the technical readiness of stakeholders, financial abilities, and expertise, etc. After the report is generated, it will provide an overview of the most important issues for initiating and efficiently planning a successful transboundary conservation process, or for furthering the already ongoing initiative. So the report will emphasize the need and key motivation for undertaking the transboundary approach, stakeholders' interests, readiness and willingness of stakeholders to initiate and engage in transboundary process, opportunities that could enhance the process or be generated by transboundary conservation, and risks that could hinder the transboundary conservation process. The report is then serves as a basis for development of any strategic plans, action plans, management plans for establishing a transboundary conservation initiative. But if the feasibility shows that there is still some work to do before engaging in transboundary initiative, it is beneficial to have it, because then you see in which areas you need to put more effort to continue with proper planning of the transboundary conservation initiative. As we said at the beginning, it's a complex process. Thank you very much. Well, I hope I was in time, and thank you for listening.
No, well done, Maja. Thank you very much for that presentation. You were spot on. Your timing was very, very good.
Thank you.
What we'd like to just use a flexible approach to this afternoon's session, and if there are any questions that anyone has for Maja at this point, we're happy to spend a few minutes on that.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Hinrich. Thank you very much for your presentation, Maja. It's very interesting. A quick question. Why did you choose to implement your tool in Excel? And how do you envision to incorporate the geodata, which might be necessary, especially for the transboundary approach?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your question. Frankly, using Excel was the most affordable option, and at the time in 2012 when we were developing it. This was primarily, we planned to do it only in the publication, but then we kind of concluded that it's not very useful to have the tool printed in the book. And we thought that it would be nice to do it in a way that the report is automatically generated while you are completing the tool. And at the time, I guess this is our technical inabilities, unfortunately, that we weren't aware of any other better way of doing it. So while doing the 2020 revision, we just stick to what we had at that time. But with proper funding, I guess we are open to any movement to other tools. Yeah, Kevan, if you want to respond to the other part of the question.
Yes, if I can, Maja, just to say that's a great question, and obviously there's room for improvement, and we have had approaches in this regard quite recently. But what one also needs to keep in mind is that when using the tool in a stakeholder engagement situation, inevitably it will be preceded by the presentation of relevant information, so that geospatial information will be presented and will be available for interrogation while the questions are being answered, while you're working through the 100 questions in the tool. So that we found certainly works very well, and you can actually be generating boundaries and interrogating maps and so on as you go along. I want to just quickly touch on a question, whether or not we see the tool being rolled out as an app into the future. I guess, Maja, there again, it depends on funding and so on. That would be wonderful. So Chloe, thanks for that question. Just in the interest of time then, let's draw the session, this session to a close. And Boris, you're up next with your experiences in Europe. Boris is the director of the IUCN Regional Office for Eastern Europe and Central Asia. He has more than 20 years of experience in nature conservation and natural resource management, including work with international organizations, national and local authorities, civil society, research, and academia. Boris is a trained expert in environmental management with core expertise in nature policy, protected area management, and transboundary conservation. He is actively involved in various aspects of strategic planning and program development. Boris is an active member of the IUCN World Commission on Protected Areas, where he serves on the executive committee for the Transboundary Conservation Specialist Group. Throughout his career, he has promoted the concepts of equitable governance, of natural resources and nature-based solutions as a response to growing societal and environmental challenges. So there you go. That's Boris. Really privileged to have you on the panel this afternoon.
It's a real pleasure being here. Though I'm a full member of the Transboundary Specialist Group, I still have to and want to thank the organizer for inviting me and for having me today to share some of the early experiences from Europe. I deliberately also wanted to shed a bit more light on transboundary efforts in Europe, as it is as we will see, it's not just a home to a number of transboundary conservation initiatives, but could be also considered a cradle of transboundary conservation globally. I myself, in this webinar, a session, this will represent both the IUCN World Commission on Protected Areas, and Kevan has already presented and shared a slide on where Transboundary Specialist Group sits within the World Commission on Protected Areas, and where the World Commission on Protected Areas is within the realm of the network of 6 expert commissions. And this slide is going one step further and actually shows where the IUCN commissions are within the IUCN family or the union. So I myself also represent the IUCN Secretariat, as I come from IUCN Regional Office from Eastern Europe and Central Asia. I feel like privileged because I can both work on knowledge standards, but I also have an opportunity to implement them in my day work. So going to the next slide, what I said is that you know, when you start exploring a little bit, going back to history and learning where transboundary conservation as we know it today, like modern conservation in general, as I would say, and then, you know, if we look into indigenous communities and indigenous knowledge and practices, the transboundary conservation was practiced centuries back. But the way how we see it and how we explain it is that it started some 100, give or take 100 years ago. And it was, as far as Europe is concerned, it was one of the earliest attempts to establish an institutionalized transboundary cooperation and conservation between the then Czechoslovakia and Poland, you know, in the aftermath of World War I. It was to resolve issues that were still unresolved after World War I and the conflict. So, you know, that there is something intrinsic with reconciliation and even post-war or conflict recovery that the transboundary cooperation and conservation does. And Maja already explained that there is a strong element of it in it. But of course, the transboundary cooperation is much more than that. It's just to show a little bit and say a word on where it comes from. So yeah, we are proud. We are not proud for some part of our history, in Europe, but we are proud that we actually initiated some good cooperation efforts that have led then to transboundary conservation as we know it today. And there is no surprise if you look at this outline map of Europe with a number of boundaries that cross and intersect what geographically would be still a relatively small region or small area as compared to the number of number of countries over there. The number of boundaries is something that prompts us to think of and to do transboundary cooperation and transboundary conservation in many of the places. Yeah, and therefore today we have a number of I would say globally important initiatives when it comes to transboundary conservation in Europe. Some of them have been institutionalized, and some of them have been also using the tool that we are presenting today, and certainly that WCPA Transboundary Group actively cooperates and contributes to a number of these initiatives. I'm very proud of presenting what the Europark Federation, for example, is doing with their Transboundary Parks network. It has its own certification and verification system. It's called Following Nature's Design. It's a very interesting one that includes now 11 transboundary sites that went through that process. And WCPA regularly participates in their meetings and contributes too. So it would be, for example, quite interesting to see using the diagnostic tool in a number of transboundary sites that are being facilitated through the Europark Federation or Europark's transboundary network. Another interesting initiative in Europe is the European Green Belt Initiative that started back in the 90s. Again, after this, the geopolitics of the region have changed and the Iron Curtain fell. We simply realized that there is a massive borderline, and there's a green line, from north to south or south to north, east, west. And that was the former divide between the east and the west, and the Iron Curtain, which actually remained quite intact, and that was the start of an interesting effort to establish transboundary cooperation. So the European Green Belt is by default a transboundary thing that supports communities and areas along the Green Belt. And exactly there, it's where we tested, or we applied our transboundary tool as we had an opportunity to work with protected areas along the Balkan section of the European Green Belt, the southernmost one, which is again a number of boundaries and number of protected areas that span across boundaries, and that we apply these diagnostic tools through a series of workshops and consultation meetings and working with stakeholders and trying to apply and understand where these protected areas stand when it comes to transboundary cooperation. We issued a simple report that actually lists all those sites and provides results on the consultation and on the application of the diagnostic tool. And the way how we organize it, because it's the first time that we did such a report, that we organized that report around 6 chapters. So first, of course, providing some background information, then following the structure of the diagnostic tool, that we provided some content as regards to reasons and needs for transboundary conservation. What are the opportunities that can also accelerate the process, that can help us generate momentum? Who are the stakeholders? Is there or not, or what kind of gaps we see when it comes to capacity of partners to initiate transboundary cooperation, and what are the major risks? So there was a relatively simple report that we produced based on that consultation that we had an application of the transboundary tool. So what came next, sort of, is that And I have to say, just to add on what Maja already said, that, you know, when we started thinking about a diagnostic tool, is actually that we realized that there isn't that much of, you know, ready-made available tools, you know, that people can use, you know, people who are concerned with transboundary conservation. So we said, okay, so we have these global guidelines, so we have some definitions, but let us try to develop something that will help the community. Yeah? And that's where this diagnostic tool it comes from. We of course that you know, we realize it's not perfect, and that it can be improved in many different ways, include its structure, the, you know, the presentation and everything. But I still do feel that there was a major step forward in providing practitioners with something that they can work on day to day, you know, something that they apply and be hands-on. And similar to that, you know, that a few years back, then when the guideline was published, the best practice guideline with new definitions, when we had this diagnostic tool, that we also started thinking, why don't we then develop some training module that will also help based on this guideline and the diagnostic tool that will help partners, interested stakeholders initiate transboundary cooperation. And that's how we started building that training module that is available today. The diagnostic tool is fully integrated into the training module, and it actually has a testing or applying the diagnostic tool on the case study that you can bring to the training. Has that as an element of the training course. You know, you can see the website where you can find the training module, all presentations, and the background a guidance note or trainer's manual, as we call it. So you can see what the training module consists of. So it's a number of presentations that follow basically the first phase of transboundary conservation based on the best practice guidelines. So it is to help stakeholders initiate transboundary cooperation. As you can see here, there is this a lesson 3, as we call it, on diagnosing the situation, is actually where you then do, if you go through that training, through that course, then when you actually do your diagnostic tool or apply your diagnostic tool. And finally, there was a workshop to validate all this, the training module that brought some around 20 practitioners and experts from Southeast Europe, East Europe, and Caucasus, well, 2+ years back in Montenegro, where we actually applied the diagnostic tool and went through and trained people how to use it in their day-to-day work. We had some planning and protected area designation authorities. We had the representatives of international organizations. We had some practitioners, park authorities, and so on. They all found the tool very useful and also gave us some good feedback on how to improve it. Yeah. And then finally, my last slide is on knowledge base. I'm positive that you are aware of, but there is a plethora of publications and sources of information on transboundary conservation. Some of it comes from IUCN. This Following Nature Design is from Europark. Then you have also a nice leaflet on the European Green Belt, and all of that, or the biggest compendium of knowledge on transboundary conservation, including some best practice cases and tools. Is available actually on www.tbpa.net, where we actually store all these publications and tools, and the diagnostic tool and the training module are also available there. And I thank you very much for your attention. Happy to answer questions, and also very pleased to bring my memories back from the beautiful trip to a Pasvik Inari transboundary site in the north of Europe along the European Green Belt. Thank you very much.
Well done, Boris. Thank you very much for that presentation. And just like Maja, your time management was outstanding. Boris, there were some questions, but before we come to those specific to you, there was a general question about the translation of the tool, and Maja, perhaps you could comment here. From Yi, from Isimod, was asking, what do people need to do to get permission?
Yes, I have just responded to Yi on chat,
okay.
But it's fine. So we definitely encourage translation of the tool. There is no special procedure or our approval that is needed for that. So we would definitely encourage any translation, but what we would like then, if it is translated, then to be shared with us, and we can also post it on TBPA net.
Excellent, thank you. And then, Boris, there were a couple of questions. Unfortunately, I don't have a name attached to these questions, just a number. So number 1491322, this is your question or your questions. How the issues of differences in laws and policies play in transboundary conservation from your perspective in Europe. And then can you also share your experience on how you dealt with the concern of the easy movement of park staff and NGO personnel working in transboundary conservation areas in the midst of security restrictions, immigration measures, etc. Can I hand those to you, Boris?
Yeah, certainly. Well, I mean, so Europe, so Europe geographically is certainly that it encompasses a number of policy frameworks and approaches and institutional arrangements. I mean, as a general answer to this question, so this is certainly one of the challenges, and that's why transboundary conservation in the first place, that's why we need a facilitated process to overcome those differences, yeah, and sometimes even barriers to effective transboundary cooperation, yeah. As far as Europe is concerned, well, it's a good part of Europe falls within the same policy framework, yeah. And in that sense, yes, there are differences, but there are quite some alignments, So that's kind of that's very specific for Europe. Yeah? This said, it's also that that national boundaries are there, yeah, no matter how aligned policies and frameworks are. So there is a need for transboundary cooperation. Yeah, I would say that this unified policy framework in the European Union. It certainly helps overcome some of the differences and some of the challenges that you would face otherwise, or they wouldn't be that easy to overcome. Yeah, but still there is a need for an effort. If you really want to see some effective transboundary cooperation in the Europe, in the Euro Park Federation, for example, is dealing with parks in Europe, not just in Europe, but they also help facilitate transboundary efforts. Yeah, so I would say that there is something specific when it comes to Europe, at least when we speak about the European Union. For the rest of the region, yes, there are differences. And that's where transboundary cooperation, the diagnostic tool, and everything comes into play. There wouldn't be transboundary conservation if there were no challenges or differences. So that comes by default. And that's something that we deal with. Then, as far as a recent crisis. Well, that wasn't helpful at all, I would say, unfortunately. I mean, we've seen the rise of the emergence and physical emergence of a number of barriers and physical barriers and fences along the border. So in that's certainly not helpful in any way when it comes to transboundary conservation. It's not just preventing the spread of migration or movement of species. It also not helpful very much for park authorities to cooperate and do some joint work on the ground. So those are all the facets of transboundary conservation that we have to take into consideration while doing it. And therefore this list of opportunities and challenges that we have.
Thank you, Boris. Excellent. It's nice to see that there are a whole series of questions coming through right now, and very relevant questions. But I'm going to use the Heinrich, and I see your hand is up. I don't know if it's up anew or whether you haven't put it down yet after your last input. But just in the interests of keeping things going, if you could, Heinrich, if you wouldn't mind putting your hand down and just parking your question, we will make sure we come to that, because I want to make sure we get through the next two presentations and still have time for giving folk an opportunity to ask questions and have a general discussion. Okay, so the next speaker we have up is Dominique Verdigo. I had the pleasure with working with Dominique in Djibouti and Ethiopia, and she is an independent sustainable tourism development professional with over 25 years of strong practical field experience, mainly in Africa. Coming from a background in architecture, Dominique always worked by choice in rural development issues. Involved in protected areas and in national park buffer zones for many years in Morocco, she naturally moved over 20 years ago from built heritage and cultural landscape issues to cultural tourism, sustainable nature-based tourism, and ecotourism development. Her work allowed bringing together her passion for the protection of natural resources and her willingness for promoting sustainable tourism in Africa through policy advisory, strategy planning, product development, capacity building, and above all, communities empowerment. Dominique worked as a consultant with the IUCN's Eastern Southern African Regional Office out of Nairobi for the EU-funded IGAD, that's the Intergovernmental, golly, sorry, I've forgotten that the meaning of that acronym, but it's the Intercountry Development Structure on the Horn of Africa, their biodiversity management program, and specifically the Lower Awash Lac Abe Transboundary Conservation Landscape on 3 different projects between 2015 and 2017. Dominique holds an MPhil degree in landscape studies from the University of Edinburgh. She's a member of the IUCN WCPA Tourism and Protected Areas Specialist Group, as well as the Transboundary Conservation Specialist Group. And she is also a member of the Global Sustainable Tourism Council. Dominique, over to you.
Thank you, Kevan, for inviting me to present the use of the tool to develop a joint management plan for the Lower Hawash Lake Abe Transboundary Conservation Landscape between Djibouti and Ethiopia, as you very well said. So a bit of background. The objective of the consultancy, of this consultancy, was to build on existing studies and to develop a draft management plan for the Lower Hawash Lake Abe ecosystem, defining limits and boundaries and including a feasibility assessment and roadmap for the establishment and development of potential community protected areas within this transboundary landscape. IUCN was a lead implementing partner for these activities through their East and Southern Africa regional office, as Kevan said. This project was actually one of the 3 demonstration sites within the EU-funded IGAD Biodiversity Management Program, where activities were carried out to showcase best practices in biodiversity conservation and natural resource management to improve ecosystem, goods and services for the benefit of local communities. One of IGAD's objectives is to assist member states with food security and environmental protection. IGAD is the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, which is a regional economic commission comprising of 8 member states: Djibouti, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Kenya, Somalia, South Sudan, Sudan, and Uganda. For many of you, probably you don't know where is Djibouti, you might know where is Ethiopia. So this Lala ecosystem, the Lower Hawash and Lake Abe ecosystem, is actually in the Horn of Africa. So let me present you briefly this ecosystem. The Hawash River in Ethiopia drains into a landlocked delta in the arid Afar region and into a series of fresh water and salt lakes. One of these is Lake Abe, and Lake Abe overlaps the border between Ethiopia and Djibouti. This transboundary landscape is mostly a dryland ecosystem, which is sparsely populated, with most communities practicing pastoralism, much of these still being nomadic, and they practicing other limited forms of subsistence livelihood activities. The Afar communities operate mainly outside the cash economy, and they still link to traditional trading systems. Local populations are organized largely according to traditional structures and manage natural resource accordingly. The remoteness, as you can see on those two pictures, and the inaccessible nature of the area poses challenges. It actually posed challenges to the project team. In a larger part of the area, transport is only possible on foot or on camel, obviously, as there are no roads. There's also no communication network and very few human settlements. There's actually no official border between Djibouti and Ethiopia in this area. The climate is extremely hot during most of the year. The need for a transboundary landscape and its shared management was actually based on the existing strong natural, social, and cultural linkages within the Afar region. So to get the process going, the consultant team, namely Kevan and myself, involved and worked with the relevant stakeholders from the two countries, from Djibouti and Ethiopia. Following the principles set out in the WCPA Best Practice Protected Area Guidelines for Transboundary Conservation, the Diagnostic Tool for Transboundary Conservation Planners was used to facilitate broad stakeholder engagement and to take them through a process of systematically assessing if they had a compelling case for the transboundary conservation landscape. Prior to the workshop, relevant information was gathered, reviewed, and shared among consultants and stakeholders. A quick run through the diagnostic tools questions had been conducted beforehand with the IGAD BM program technical advisor and one of Djibouti Ministry of Environment's directors. The specific objective of this run-through was to test the tool's applicability for later use with the full team during the 3-day workshop. This exercise proved to be fruitful. It was agreed that the tool was an appropriate mechanism to use to generate shared understanding with the rest of the team and to work towards a shared vision. Prior to the 3-day workshop as well, 2 full days were dedicated to field visits, which helped building a sense of team among the stakeholders from the two countries, Djibouti and Ethiopia, as well as building a spirit of overall collaboration. This proved to be important for the coming days of the participatory interactive workshop. The first topic on the workshop agenda was obviously to confirm the IUCN definition for a transboundary landscape. But in addition to the acceptance for and the relevance of the IUCN definition, an important aspect of the discussion was the consensus reached on the need to include the term conservation into the project title, thus calling it the Lower Hawash Lake Abe Transboundary Conservation Landscape. or the Lala TBCL. Building on the joint exposure to the area over the previous 2 days in the field, the flip chart was used to graphically illustrate the position of the key features of the zone. In conjunction with using Google Earth and a data projector, a boundary was suggested and discussed. Where necessary, features such as water courses, extremely important in this area, and the position of settlements were drawn in more clearly on the Google Earth image to assist with the process. After many discussions and deliberation, it resulted in an area of approximately 1.7 million hectares, but over which there was a mutual agreement. It was actually the second iteration from this workshop. So the tool was used to guide a systematic discussion on the natural, social, economic, and institutional features of the target area. This process took a full day of very, very hard work to ensure that all the questions were well understood and answered, as multiple way translation was required due to the 5 working languages. But all the participants contributed positively throughout, and in-depth discussions had to reach consensus on the answers among stakeholders. The tool helped the process in terms of engaging the stakeholders from Djibouti and Ethiopia, coming from different backgrounds and representing different organizations. One crucial aspect is that the tool helps getting participants to see and respect, sorry, a slight technical. So yeah, I'm sorry about that.
Can I help, Dominique?
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's just fine. Yeah, so the tool helped the process in terms of engaging stakeholders from Djibouti and Ethiopia, as they were coming from different backgrounds and they were representing different organizations, civil servants and politicians in the same room. One crucial aspect is that the tool helped getting participants to see and respect each other's perspective despite those cultural differences. The outcome showed that there is a compelling case to supporting the initiative. There also appears to be more opportunities than barriers. It must be stressed at this point that capacity shortages, especially as far as financial resources are concerned, would pose a serious threat to the feasibility of the project. So based on the shared understanding generated from the time spent on the tool's questions, the participants were asked to spend more time thinking about and articulating what they believed was an appropriate long-term vision for the Lala TBCL. Preceding this was a presentation on the approach to the development of the joint management plan and an explanation of how the various components link and work together to provide the basis from which responsible stakeholders can work meaningfully towards the achievement of the vision for the area, while using the joint management plan to leverage support, as well as to track and report on progress. The final long-term vision for the Lala TBCL, which is right on the screen, that was agreed to by the stakeholders during the workshop, was actually unpacked and explained in the final plan in order for all stakeholders to have a full understanding of the vision's meaning and especially its implication. The management objectives were directly derived from the vision and thereafter operational goals and actions. Governance arrangement for the Lala TBCL were also proposed in the joint management plan. That was actually done after the workshop. This is the cover of the joint management plan that was approved late 2016. But in my perspective, as a practitioner and as one of the two facilitators of this process, using the diagnostic tool has helped immensely to facilitate the engagement of the stakeholders of the two countries, as well as the development of the LALA TBCL joint management plan. The diagnostic tool revealed that there was a convincing case, many opportunities, and few risks for this initiative. It has also provided good insight and information for components of the later joint management plan. An additional outcome was a shared understanding that was developed and the sense of teamwork and ownership for the initiative amongst the stakeholders from Djibouti and Ethiopia, despite their differences beyond the 5 working languages and the multiple way translation required. The diagnostic tool made the process of developing the framework for the joint management plan straightforward, as for example, the shared vision and the prioritized management objective. The diagnostic tool was therefore a great mechanism to use in this Afar region transboundary conservation landscape process. The tool enabled a rapid assessment of the feasibility for the LALA transboundary conservation landscape, but offered as well the possibility of collaborative participating approach at transboundary level. If I may, I would like to share one last lesson learned from this 2016 LALA TBCL process with regard to the capacity for implementation. I can only encourage other practitioners and or facilitators not to lose sight of the financial sustainability aspect of such a project. Resource limitation might indeed slow down the implementation process and prevent the initiative to move ahead as quickly as one would have liked to. It would only be fair to actually show you the team member and all the stakeholders from Ethiopia and Djibouti. Thank you very much.
No, excellent, Dominique. Thanks very much. Great memories coming back there. It was a very interesting and exciting time there in the Afar region between those two wonderful countries. Just on the sideline, we did try to get representation from both from Ethiopia and Djibouti. Unfortunately, the guys were unavailable. They had other commitments. And so once again, Dominique, thank you very much for stepping up to the plate in the absence of Dr. Fanuel Kabede and his colleagues. I don't see any questions pertaining specifically to this presentation at the moment. So let's, in the interest of time again, go right across to the early morning in the United States and ask Todd to step up to the plate. But before he does that, let me not forget to introduce him. Todd Walters, the founder and executive director of International Peace Parks Expeditions, IPPE, which empowers environmental peace building through field-based experiential learning expeditions through critical transboundary ecosystems to train conflict-sensitive, environmentally sustainable, and culturally aware students and professionals across multiple disciplines in order to address our shared interconnected global challenges. IPPE partners with local organizations involved in transboundary conservation networks in 7 different countries and partners with different universities to accredit the programs. IPPE also facilitates student field research opportunities with international partners. Todd has also adapted the peace and conflict impact assessment methodology to transboundary protected areas and produced short documentary films in the Transcending Boundaries series, which portrays multiple stakeholder perspectives concerning challenges and cooperation in transboundary protected areas. He has been a member of the Transboundary Conservation Specialist Group for 10 years now, which during which he co-led a professional transboundary conservation practitioners workshop, Hands Across Borders in America, representing the group at the Convention on Biological Diversity and as presented at the World Parks Congress and the World Conservation Congress, and before a special committee of the United Nations concerning the protection of the environment during times of armed conflict. Todd has published a number of chapters and articles related to transboundary conservation, environmental peacebuilding, and experiential learning. He is a national outdoor leadership school trained outdoor adventure guide with wilderness first response emergency medical training and has led expeditions in dozens of countries around the globe. Todd, over to you, and please give us your perspective of using the tool within a learning environment.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Kevan. There we go. I hope everyone can see my screen.
Yep.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Kevan, Maja, Boris, and Dominique. It's an honor to be on this panel with each of you and to get to share some of the experiences that I've had using the Transboundary Conservation Diagnostic Tool in the field in different locations around the world with undergraduate and master's students at the university level. So this is what I'm going to focus on over the course of my 15 minutes. Just a quick introduction to international peace parks as a subset of transboundary conservation areas. An introduction to International Peace Park expeditions, our organization, our mission, pedagogy, and how we operate. The specific details of how we actually apply the Transboundary Conservation Diagnostic Tool in the field with students. And then the process of synthesizing and presenting that information to our local partners at the end of our expedition programs so that the students capture the lessons learned that they gathered over the course of the program in the field. So what is an international peace park? An international peace park is essentially a very special designation that the IUCN has given to any of 3 different types of transboundary protected areas. There's the traditional protected area, the transboundary conservation landscape or seascape, and the migratory conservation areas. Any of those 3 different formal designations can be added the designation of a park for peace, which is really looking to highlight the promotion, celebration, and commemoration of cooperation between 2 or more different countries and the peace and stability that has resulted because of that cooperation. So why do we dedicate international peace parks? Why are they important? Well, oftentimes international diplomacy is discussed around issues of economic or security or politics. It's very little where there are other opportunities for entry points into international diplomatic discussions. And transboundary environmental cooperation is considered a soft entry point with low stakes that can be an opportunity to be able to establish frameworks of cooperation that can then yield opportunities to address those more challenging discussions in the economic, political, and security spheres. It helps to be able to shift incentive structures away from environmental exploitative behavior, things like illegal logging, poaching, trafficking across those borders, and towards initiatives that support conservation through livelihood creation for those local communities. It begins to provide the opportunity for people to think beyond their nation state territory and begin to think of the protected area from an ecosystem perspective that spans those political borders and connecting with it as an entire intact ecosystem as opposed to the portion of that ecosystem that sits within a nation's borders. Peace parks can really help to coordinate cross-border collaboration and help to create frameworks for cooperation that can be used in other parts of international diplomacy and to address issues of previous grievance, to provide peace building opportunities. And then lastly, as a dedication of a park for peace, there is a strong symbolism that can be used to be able to show a real world example of cross-border cooperation between countries. And that symbolism can be held up in speeches, in television appearances, and throughout the media, to be able to use that symbol as a rallying point to galvanize people. So that's why international peace parks are important. And that's one of the reasons that we chose international peace parks as the location for all of our programs. Because if we're going to be working with the next generation of practitioners that are going to be doing transboundary conservation, we need to bring them to the locations where transboundary conservation is happening. We need to introduce them to all of the stakeholders that are participating and taking part in the transboundary conservation initiatives. We need to give the students an opportunity to not just hear from those people, but to be able to question and have conversations to be able to understand in greater depth. And then to be able to actually experience the transboundary landscape themselves, to actually be in that ecosystem, to cross those political borders, and to experience firsthand with real world observations the cooperation and challenges to transboundary conservation. And so who are we? Who's International Peace Park Expeditions? Well, you heard in the introduction, essentially our mission statement. We're really working to try and use field-based experiential learning to empower a new network of practitioners and young people that are interested in supporting transboundary conservation and pursuing it for their careers. As mentioned in the intro, we do 3 different types of projects. We have a Transcending Boundaries micro-documentary films. We have the peace and conflict impact assessments of those transboundary protected areas. And we have our expeditions. I'm going to be focusing the rest of the presentation just on our expeditions and how we apply the diagnostic tool during those expeditions. So where do we work? First, in the Balkans, in this area between Kosovo, Albania, and Montenegro. Second, in Central America, between Panama, Costa Rica, and 5 different indigenous territories in Parque Internacional La Amistad. And in Waterton Glacier International Peace Park, cooperation between the United States, Canada, and the Transboundary Blackfoot Confederacy of Native Americans and First Nation tribes. So those are the 3 places where we've been invited by our local partners to be able to operate in the field with these expeditions and to use the diagnostic tool. As far as our pedagogy goes, in the field, we're trying to combine the best of traditional academic learning, expert guest lectures on specific topics that are relevant to transboundary conservation. But we're also providing the chance for the students to be able to bridge the gap between the theory that we learn at the beginning of the program and the practice that we experience when we're on expedition in the real world. And the way that we do our academic component is that there's a traditional seminar style course, reading and discussion ahead of time before we leave for the field. We spend time in Washington, D.C. visiting institutions like the National Park Service, Conservation International, the U.S. Institute for Peace, National Geographic, and basically build the theoretical understanding of what transboundary conservation is and how international peace parks operate in the region that we're going. Students will do several different projects throughout the course. They'll do a reading presentation and discussion. They'll do individual travel style journals on prompted questions about the material that we're learning about. They'll do an individual project, which is beneficial to a local partner organization. But the main thing is that throughout the course of the 3 weeks in the field, they will use the Transboundary Diagnostic Tool. So the way that we use it is at the beginning, we introduce it, we go through it, we go question by question. We ask and make sure that everyone understands the dynamics and the details of the questions. And then when we actually get into the field, students will use three main things to be able to gather information to fill out the diagnostic tool with their team. They'll use their real world observations. They'll use the materials that we have been reading for the course, and they'll use the interactions that they have with our guest lecturers, experts, and local stakeholders that we meet within the field. We try and focus specifically on using the diagnostic tool as a skill building opportunity to build professional skills for students in the field, how to work with a language interpreter, asking interview questions and follow-ups, being able to triangulate and validate source information and details, as well as sort of highlighting how to conduct the analysis and how to understand what type of recommendations might be helpful going forward. To do this, we break students into groups of 2 or 3 each, and we focus on water, forestry, and ecotourism so that they can really dive deep on one particular topic area. And then the students come back together at the end, present it to our local partner organizations, and it creates the full picture with each of those sort of 3 main topic areas. So this is where we go. This peak right in front of us right here is Tri-Border Peak. This is the peak where Albania, Kosovo, and Montenegro all come together on a single mountaintop summit. And I'm going to bring you down into those mountains now and a little bit closer to the ground. You can see these beautiful valleys in the bottom. And in these valleys are the villages. And within the villages are these really unique natural resource management structures, water resource management initiatives, and these trail systems that link these villages across the political boundaries. And so part of our program, part of our work is we spend a couple of days in the urban areas where we visit embassies, we meet with our local partners, and we start to get introduced to the region. We go up into the villages, and we do traditional homestays with local families for cross-cultural learning opportunities about food and music and culture, and also about the process of transitioning from traditional sustainable livelihoods to mixed economic methods using traditional livelihoods and adapting and growing into ecotourism. And then from there, we head up into the high mountains and we stay with local groups as we're walking through the alpine regions, crossing the boundaries between these countries. While we're actually doing the walks, we're understanding the layers of the landscape that we're walking through, the history of the Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the World War II, the conflict in 1999, and the impact that it's had on the people and the culture of the region. This is one of the bunkers that you can see on the border crossing between Albania and Montenegro. We also visit a ton of different ecotourism sites along the way, and we use these sites as locations to hold our outdoor classrooms and to talk about initiatives that are focused on material that will help us to answer the questions in the Transboundary Diagnostic Tool. These are some of our outdoor classrooms where you see some of these conversations and these lectures actually happening. And you can see that, having the discussion in the place next to the, the river that's being discussed for a hydro development project is a lot more of a meaningful, powerful learning experience than discussing that in the classroom and reading materials. One of the cross-cultural homestay visits and traditional meals, and some of the traditional dress and culture that we get to see over the course of the program. So just to get towards the end now, some of the things that the students learn as they have gone through the process of these 3 weeks of gathering the information, answering the questions, and starting to fill out the diagnostic tool, they start to understand the legacy of the conflict in the region and how the overarching vision of creating the proposed Balkans Peace Park is playing a role to stimulate transboundary conservation. They understand that the region that we're in is a biodiversity hotspot, and they start to recognize it from an ecosystem perspective and not a sovereign territory perspective. They recognize that cooperation for these higher goals that transcend differences in ethnicity, religion, language, these are things that are the ways that transboundary conservation contributes to environmental peace building. And so there's 2 great examples in the Balkans. One is the scientific cooperation around the Balkan Links Recovery Program. Oh, sorry, that's my timer. So I'm going to take an extra minute, Kevin. And there's been a transboundary ecotourism initiative that's been organized by GTZ. There's also that scientific cooperation, that economic cooperation, and there's been an initiative around security cooperation to make the border crossing protocols standardized throughout all 3 countries to allow for a single form to be filled out that all 3 countries will process for your permission to cross the political boundaries. And the lessons learned from my perspective as an educator using the diagnostic tool as a teaching tool is that the process of learning and gathering the information and filling out the tool is just as important as the final assessment that is produced. Through that process, the learning that occurs is immense, and the opportunities that are surfaced at the end really have transformative potential. The process of having to verbalize and present those results to our local partners makes the participants really focus on doing a valid analysis, synthesizing the lessons that they learned over the course of the 3 weeks, and interconnecting lots of different disciplines in order to be able to provide a true perspective of what they observed on the ground. Walking through the questions beforehand is extremely helpful, particularly for clarity, but also for planting the seed at the beginning so that when information comes in, they know that there's already questions that they need to parse that information out to be able to answer. Using specific examples is critical. Not just talking in general about water resource management, but being able to, specifically note the river and the location and the details around that specific example. And then the last thing is this process of combining observation with desktop research with real world interviews and Q&As. Combines to give us the greatest accuracy of the information that is gathered over the course of the tool, using the tool. And so that's the presentation of using the tool with students in the field. Thank you very much. I am open to answer any questions.
Thanks, Todd. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think we are fast running out of time, and fortunately, in some way, it's fortunate that there aren't too many questions popping up. If I may just use the privileged position that I have as a sort of facilitators, that and really a message out there to any transboundary conservation practitioners. What Todd has presented here as using the tool within a learning environment is that we need to really understand that we are constantly in a learning environment. We cannot afford to go into any transboundary conservation process thinking that we have all the answers. And what the tool provides for is that objective means to step back from the situation and very carefully and systematically work through all 100 questions and being open and willing to hear what oftentimes could be very conflicting perspectives. And to be able to try and bring these diverse perspectives together into a shared understanding of what the dynamics are that we're trying to manage in these transboundary environments. So I don't know if I've missed any questions, Richard, or any of the panel. We seem to have been doing fairly well using the Q&A box to respond to folk, and it looks like folk have been happy with those responses, as well as in the chat box. So we've been multitasking here. Any comments from the panel? How do you guys feel? Are there any questions that I've missed? Just remember to unmute yourselves.
I think we are fine. All the questions have been answered. So
yes, I think so. I think all the presentations were on time, and it looks like our session is on time. Well, as you know, as much as it's really good, seeing all of my colleagues on the panel, and would love to be able to go to the fridge now and pull out a cold beer to share with you. It is a Friday afternoon in many places. I know Todd's got a full day ahead of him, a full Friday. So I think I want to thank you all for joining me in this afternoon session. It's been great. I think we've had some wonderful questions, some lovely engagements with participants, and I think that we will certainly see an increase in interest in the Transboundary Conservation Specialist Group, and I sincerely hope as well an increase in the use of the tool, and particularly that question on translation. That really is encouraging. That's wonderful to see. So maybe from the panelists, before we wrap up, a quick 5-second from each of you. Maja, anything that you would like to conclude with?
Well, I would just like to thank everyone for joining us today. It was a great pleasure to be with all the panelists, and I'm happy that I hope that the participants are also happy with the presentations, and we all learned more than we knew, and hopefully we will do something even better with the tool in the future. Thanks.
Super, thank you, Maja. Boris?
As well. Also thanking all the participants for being with us, for their questions. As much as we try to address some of the key issues, we know that transboundary conservation is case by case. There are some patterns, but still each and every transboundary site or initiative deserves full attention. So we hope that we manage to answer at least in part some of the questions. We stand ready to provide more feedback, but also to learn from our colleagues. We are available for that. This is Friday afternoon here, so I think that there is some hot tea waiting for me. Thanks, Kevan, for facilitating all this.
It's a pleasure, Boris. Good to have you on the panel. Dominique, any final words from yourself?
Yeah, well, thank you, Kevan. I'm very pleased to have been allowed to jump in, and I should only thank Dr. Fanuel to actually miss the appointment and miss a chance to be here. So I'm very pleased and honored to have participated, and thanks to all the participants and to some of the questions. It actually brought back very, very nice memory, and actually would say about the tool, yes, what you said about being open and not expect anything, use it actually in a very systematic way, and we were, I hope you'll be able to not contradict me, but we're actually very impressed by all the inputs from all participants. So it's actually, for me as a practitioner, for the only time I've used it, it's been extremely useful and practical. Thank you.
Nice.
Thank you to all.
Thanks, Dominique. Todd, some last words from you.
Great. Thank you very much, Kevan, for organizing this and pulling us all together. It's great to see the familiar faces of colleagues and to see some of the names of the participants that were watching today's presentations. One thing that I know about myself, and I know about a lot of people that work in this space, is that we are open to new people contacting us. And so if you have questions, if you have follow-ups, if you want to have conversations, don't hesitate. Don't hesitate. Send us an email, organize a chance for another conversation. These are the events that can help to stimulate those types of things and move things forward. In the current setting where we're all tied down at home. And so yeah, it's great to be a part of this, great to have a chance to share our work. And I think that one of the things that's encouraging is that it's growing, right? When we all started and we were all a part of this 10, 15 years ago, there weren't those resources, there weren't those materials, they didn't exist. And now those things are happening. And if you are using the Transboundary Diagnostic Tool in your own area, or if you would like to, those are the kind of things that we want to learn more about. We want to understand how you're using it. We want to understand the results. We want to help to share your work. And so, I would just say that let's build off of this as a momentum starter and not just have it be something that ends when we wrap up the call in a couple of minutes.
No, absolutely, Todd. Thank you. Thanks for that invitation to folk to keep the momentum going. That would be great. So yes, to all of you again, as the panel, thank you so much for giving of your time and committing to being part of this webinar, and to the participants who are still with us. Lovely to see the numbers up there. Thanks very much for hanging in there towards the end, all the way to the end. And lastly, to Rucha and the Vital Sites team, thanks for hosting us. Have a good weekend and keep safe. All the best. Bye-bye now.